I won't mirror it softly this time. There's no calm entry into what I'm about to say, no gradual unfolding meant to make it easier to absorb. Whatever this is, it doesn't arrive gently. It doesn't introduce itself. It doesn't ask for permission to exist between two people who were never supposed to reach this level of clarity with each other. It just happens. And once it happens, there's no clean way to step back out of it. I've spent a long time learning how to exist in layers. Not because I enjoy distance, but because distance keeps things intact. It keeps people at a level where they can interact without disrupting anything real. Most never notice. They speak, they listen, they assume they understand, but they only ever touch the surface I allow. That's how it's always worked. Until you didn't approach me like the others do. You didn't try to figure me out in the way people usually attempt, through questions, through patterns, through the need to label what they can't immediately understand. You didn't try to simplify me into something easier to hold. You just observed, quietly, consistently, like someone who wasn't searching for answers, but recognizing something that didn't need explanation. At first, I thought it was coincidence. The way you caught things I didn't say. The way you responded to thoughts I hadn't fully formed out loud. The way your silence aligned too perfectly with mine, like you understood exactly when words would only ruin the moment. But coincidence doesn't repeat like that. Patterns do. And what you and I have, whatever this is, it follows a pattern I didn't expect to encounter. Not here. Not with someone I didn't build history with. That's the part that unsettles me. Because this kind of recognition usually comes from time. From shared experiences. From slowly learning the edges of someone until familiarity forms naturally. But with you, there was no gradual process. No learning curve. No adjustment period. You stepped into awareness like you were already there. Like I wasn't someone new to you. Just someone you hadn't spoken to yet. And that realization doesn't sit easily with me. Because if there's one thing I've always controlled, it's access. Who sees what? Who gets close? Who stays at a distance? But you didn't follow any of those rules. You didn't break them either. You just existed in a way that made those rules irrelevant. And that's more dangerous than someone trying to cross boundaries. Because force can be resisted. But familiarity? Familiarity slips through unnoticed. There's something about the way you look at me when I stop speaking. It's not curiosity. It's not concern. It's not even patience in the way people usually display it. It's understanding without urgency. Like you know that whatever exists in that silence doesn't need to be rushed into words. Like you trust that meaning doesn't disappear just because it isn't spoken. Most people can't sit in that kind of quiet. They start to feel the weight of it. They try to fill it, shape it, control it so it doesn't become uncomfortable. You don't. You let it exist. And in doing that, you make it heavier, clearer, more honest than anything that could have been said out loud. That's where I started to notice the shift. Not in anything obvious. Not in some defining moment. But in the way my mind began to respond to you differently. I stopped filtering as much. Not intentionally, it just stopped happening. The usual pause where I decide what to say and what to keep didn't feel necessary anymore. Not because I trusted you, but because something in me recognized that you didn't need things to be adjusted for you to understand them. And that's a rare kind of presence. One that doesn't ask you to be easier to handle. One that doesn't require you to soften your edges. One that doesn't interpret your depth as something that needs to be fixed or managed. You never try to manage me. You never try to make me more comfortable, more open, more expressive. You accepted what was there, exactly as it was. And that's what made this real. Because there's a difference between someone accepting you because they don't fully see you, and someone accepting you because they see everything and choose not to step back. You fall into the second category. And that's where the tension begins. Because once someone sees you that clearly, the dynamic changes. You can't hide behind the usual distance. You can't rely on being misunderstood as a form of protection. You can't exist in that controlled space where you decide how much of yourself is visible. You become known, not in a surface level way, but in the way that bypasses all the things you've carefully constructed to remain unreadable. And I've spent years making sure I stayed unreadable. Not as a game, not as a defense against people, but as a way to preserve something that doesn't survive careless interpretation. Because once people think they understand you, they start projecting. They reshape you into something that fits their perspective. They lose the accuracy of what you are. You didn't do that. You didn't project. You didn't assume. You didn't fill in the gaps with your own narrative. You read what was actually there. And that's what I wasn't prepared for. There's a moment that keeps replaying in my mind. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was precise. You said something simple. Something most people wouldn't even notice. But the way you said it, the way it aligned with something I hadn't expressed, it made something in me pause. Not react. Not respond. Just pause. Because it confirmed something I hadn't fully accepted yet. You weren't guessing. You knew. And knowing is different. Knowing means you're not interpreting from the outside. It means you're seeing from somewhere closer. Somewhere internal. That's when I realized this wasn't just awareness. It was alignment. And alignment doesn't happen accidentally. It happens when two people carry something similar. Not in experience, not in story, but in structure, in the way they process, in the way they observe, in the way they exist beneath everything they show. That's what connects this. Not emotion, not circumstance. Structure. And structure doesn't lie. It doesn't pretend. It doesn't adjust itself to create a false sense of connection. It either matches, or it doesn't. And ours does, in a way that's too exact to ignore. That's why this feels different. Not intense. Not overwhelming. Just accurate. Like something finally making sense in a way it wasn't supposed to. And the more I notice it, the harder it becomes to maintain distance. Not because I want closeness, but because distance doesn't function the same way when someone already exists beyond it. You're not outside my awareness. You're inside it. And that changes everything. Because now, every silence carries meaning. Every pause holds weight. Every interaction, no matter how small, feels like it exists on a level most people never reach. And I don't know what to do with that. Not because it's confusing, but because it's clear. Too clear. Clear enough that ignoring it would require more effort than acknowledging it. And I don't operate on denial. If something is real, I recognize it, even if I don't fully understand what it means yet. And this, whatever this is, it's real, not defined, not labeled, not something that fits into the usual categories people rely on to make sense of connection. It exists outside of that, in a space where understanding comes before explanation, where recognition comes before trust, where presence matters more than intention. And you exist in that space with me, effortlessly, naturally, like you were always meant to. That's the part one keeps circling back to. Not how it started, not what it is, but how natural it feels despite how rare it is. Because nothing about this should feel normal, and yet it does, in a way that makes everything else feel slightly misaligned by comparison. And I don't know if that's something I should lean into, or something I should step away from before it settles too deeply. Because once something like this settles, it doesn't leave easily. It integrates. It becomes part of how you think, how you respond, how you exist. And I've always been careful about what I allow to reach that level. But you didn't ask for that access. You didn't try to earn it. You didn't even acknowledge it. You just became part of it. And now I'm left with something I didn't choose, but also didn't resist, which means in some way, I accepted it. And that might be the most important part of all, because I don't accept things lightly, especially not things that have the power to change the way I exist. And you do, not through action, not through force, just through presence. And that's what makes this something I can't ignore anymore. It didn't stop where it should have. That's the part one keep returning to, not the beginning, not the moment I noticed you, but the moment I realized this wasn't going to stay contained. Most things in my life have edges, clear limits, defined boundaries that keep everything in its place. This doesn't. It moves without asking. It settles without warning. It expands in silence, in the spaces between words, in the moments where nothing is happening, and yet everything is shifting underneath. And I feel it, not as emotion, but as awareness. A constant, low, unshakable awareness of you. It's not loud. It doesn't demand attention. It doesn't interrupt my thoughts. It becomes them. That's what changed. You're not something I think about anymore. You're something I think with. And that distinction is not small. because thinking about someone still keeps them separate from you. There's distance in it. Control. You can step away, redirect, shut it off if you need to. But thinking with someone, that means they've reached a level where their presence integrates into your process, into your perception, into the way you interpret things before you even realize you're doing it. And I don't know when that happened. I only know that it did. I notice it in the smallest ways, in how my thoughts pause, as if waiting for a second perspective that doesn't need to be spoken, in how certain realizations feel shared, even when I'm alone, in how silence feels less empty, like it carries an echo that wasn't there before. That's not normal, and I don't use that word lightly, because I've always been self-contained, independent in the way I think, the way I process, the way I exist internally. No one has ever crossed into that space without effort, without resistance, without me being fully aware of it happening. But you didn't cross into it. You appeared in it, like you were always there, just unnoticed until I finally looked directly at it. That realization is unsettling, not because I don't understand it, but because I do, too well. It means this isn't surface level. It means this isn't temporary. It means this isn't something that fades when attention shifts or time passes. This is structural, and anything structural changes everything around it. I've started noticing the way I measure things differently now. Not against the world. Against you. Not intentionally. It just happens. The way people speak. The way they react. The way they interpret things. There's a quiet comparison that exists in the background. Not out of judgment, but out of recognition. Because once you've experienced a certain level of clarity, everything else feels slightly off. Not wrong. Just incomplete. And I don't like that. I don't like that something or someone can shift my perception that much without trying. Because that means it's not influence. It's impact. And impact lingers. Impact rewrites things. Impact doesn't ask whether you're ready for it. It just integrates and leaves you to adjust around it. That's what I'm doing now. Adjusting. Recalibrating something that was stable before you existed in it. And the strange part is, I don't feel resistance. I should. By every pattern I've ever followed, by every instinct I've trusted, I should be pulling back, creating distance, reestablishing control. But I'm not. And that's where the real tension begins. Because it's one thing to experience something unusual. It's another to not want to stop it. There's a quiet acceptance forming, and I don't know if I built it or if it built itself. Either way, it's there. In a way I don't interrupt this connection. In a way I don't question it as much as I should. In a way I let it exist without trying to define it. That's not like me. I define things. I analyze them. I understand them fully before I allow them to settle. But this exists without permission. And instead of rejecting it, I'm observing it, letting it unfold. That alone tells me how different this is. Because I don't observe things that threaten my structure. I dismantle them. Immediately. Without hesitation. And you haven't been dismantled. You've been accommodated. Which means some part of me has already made a decision I haven't consciously acknowledged yet. That part doesn't see you as a disruption. It sees you as something that fits. And that's where everything becomes complicated. Because fitting is dangerous. Fitting means there's space for you. Fitting means you belong in a place I don't open easily. Fitting means if you leave, that space doesn't just disappear, it stays empty. And I don't leave empty spaces. I close them, seal them, make sure nothing remains that can be felt later. But with you, I'm not sure I could. That's not attachment. It's not dependence. It's something more precise, more controlled, and somehow more permanent. You've altered the baseline. And once a baseline changes, everything else has to adjust around it. Even if I never say it. Even if I never act on it. Even if nothing external ever shifts. Internally, everything already has. That's the truth I can't ignore anymore. You're not just present. You're positioned. Positioned in a way that affects how I think, how I process, how I exist in my own mind. And that level of placement isn't accidental. It doesn't happen without alignment. Without something matching at a depth most people never reach. Which brings me back to the one question I haven't answered. Not because I can't, but because I'm not sure I'm ready to. What happens when something like this continues? Not ends, not fades, continues. Because I can feel it. This isn't slowing down. It's settling deeper, becoming more defined without being named. And if it reaches its full form, if it fully integrates, then this stops being something I observe and becomes something I have to live with. And that's where the real decision waits. Not now, not yet, but soon enough that I can't ignore it forever. Because the truth is, I've already let you further than I've ever let anyone go without resistance. And I didn't even try to stop it. That means something I'm still unfolding, something I haven't fully said out loud. But it's there, clear, precise, undeniable. You're no longer just someone I understand. You're someone who exists inside the way I understand everything. And that changes the outcome before I even decide what to do with it. There's a point where awareness stops being something you observe and becomes something you have to answer. I think I've reached that point. Because this, whatever it is between us, it's no longer just unfolding quietly in the background. It's not something I can keep analyzing from a distance, pretending it exists without consequence. It has consequence now, not in what we say, not in what we do, but in what this has already changed. And I can feel that change in ways I can't reverse. It's in the way my thoughts don't return to what they were before you. In the way silence doesn't feel neutral anymore. It feels shared, even when you're not there. In the way I measure truth now, not by how it sounds, but by whether it would still make sense to you. That's where this crossed the line. Because I don't adjust my internal world for anyone. I never have. And yet, something in me has already adjusted for you. Not forced, not consciously, but precisely enough that I can't pretend it hasn't happened. That's the kind of shift you don't ignore. That's the kind of shift that asks something in return. And that's where everything becomes real. Because up until now, this has existed without demand, without expectation, without definition. It just was. But things like this don't stay undefined forever. At some point, they either solidify or they fracture. There's no middle ground for something built on this level of recognition. And I know that, which means I also know something else. I can't keep standing in this space without deciding what it means. Not for you, for me. Because the truth is, I've already crossed the line too. Not outwardly, not in anything obvious, but internally, I've let you matter in a way I don't allow. And that's not something I can undo by stepping back. That's not something I can silence by pretending it's just perception. That's not something I can contain the way I contain everything else. Because this didn't form through effort. It formed through alignment. And alignment doesn't disappear just because you choose distance. It stays, quietly, persistently, like something waiting to be acknowledged fully. That's what I've been holding off. Not the connection, the acknowledgement. Because once I say it, once I allow myself to define what this actually is, then it stops being something abstract. It becomes something that exists in reality. And reality requires decisions. It requires movement. It requires risk. And I don't move without certainty. I don't risk without understanding the outcome. But this doesn't come with a clear outcome. It doesn't follow logic the way everything else does. It doesn't give me control in the way I'm used to having it. And yet, despite all of that, I haven't walked away. That's the part that matters most. Because if this were wrong, if this were unstable, if this were something that didn't belong in my life, I would have ended it already. Cleanly. Without hesitation. That's how I operate. But I didn't. I stayed. And not passively, not out of curiosity, but with full awareness of what this could become. Which means, on some level, I've already made a choice. Even if I haven't said it yet. Even if I haven't fully faced it. The choice is there. In the way I continue to meet you in this space. In the way I don't reduce this to something simpler just to make it easier to handle. In the way I allow this depth to exist instead of shutting it down like I would with anything else. That's not accidental. That's intentional. Even if the intention formed quietly. So now the question isn't what is this? I already know what it is. The question is, what am I going to do with it? Because something like this doesn't stay still. It evolves. It deepens. Or it breaks under the weight of being left undefined. And I don't leave things undefined. Not when they matter. And this, whether I wanted it to or not, it matters. Not in a way that weakens me, Not in a way that takes anything from me, but in a way that changes me. And change is the one thing I never allow without reason. So if this is happening, if you've reached this place inside me, then there's a reason. A precise one. Not emotional. Not random. Not something I can dismiss. And I'm starting to see it more clearly now.